This is something else I want to talk about while I'm working with this 237. This is my 237 from Vermont. It's kind of my backup machine because my 237 from Michigan had a tough shipping experience. Um, but this is a wonderful machine that sews wonderfully. And I might have said in my previous video that these were made from 1968 to 72. It might be 68 to 70, I'd have to check again. But they were only made for a few years. And so if you can grab one, I believe it's really the only machine you'd ever need, simply because it does have straight stitch or zigzag. It's a low shank side clamping machine by Singer, so any of the vintage attachments will fit it. It's really a great machine. So what I'm doing is I want to talk a little bit about carding wool and using it in a couple of different ways. Over here you see a drum carder. This is what a drum carder looks like. And on the carder right now is alpaca. Now, alpaca is a very fine, soft, silky fiber that does not have any lanolin in it. It's actually a hair and not a wool fiber. It's you have to add static. I mean, it's like when you condition your hair and how soft your hair is. That's what alpaca is like. And so right now that's on the drum carder. And you could probably do what I'm going to talk about with alpaca, but it would be a little bit more difficult. But you can see this is where you actually end up with a bat of fiber on the larger drum. And the smaller drum collects all the junky fiber, and also it feeds, when you turn this, the big drum pulls these loose fibers off of there, and then what's left on there gets packed down very tightly. Now, when you're spinning merino, carding merino or rambouillet, that smaller drum gives you something like this. My brother sent me about 3 pounds of merino that I had to wash a total of like 7 times. And I think that was because it had been sitting in a box for several years, and the lanolin in the merino really kind of hardened, and so it took extra washing to get it clean. But if you card your own merino, or you card your own rambouillet, Polyplay, Dorset, Corriedale might not do it as much, but any of the softer, high lanolin wool fibers, this is what's going to come off the small drum of the drum carder. And it's very compact and thick. And I use this for dust rags. As you can see, I mean, they stay together more or less, so I use them as dust rags. And there is a little bit of lanolin left in them, which traps the dust. They're great, so you can use them as that. But when off of the big drum, out of all that merino, some of it is very good fiber, and some of it is what would really be called seconds on a full fleece. And it's going to have lumps in it, and maybe some dirt, or maybe it's a little bit felted. Maybe the people never took care of the sheep or something, and you get clumps. So there's going to be better fiber and less than better fiber in every pound of merino or similar wool. These two pieces of bat are actually lesser quality merino. I can spin it, but when I spin this, I would have to stop quite often to pull out all the little tiny lumps. So what I'm going to do with this is, and it's something you can think about doing, one thing that I did with some of this is put strips of it in a pillowcase and make a dog bed. And what I was going to do with that particular dog bed is quilt it. So then it holds this raw bat right in place and it won't get lumpy. Another thing that I'm going to be doing is making slipper socks. Remember slipper socks? This is a very vintage package from my mother's old yarn shop. And I have held on to these silly soles for a long time. Now these, because they're old, they're made extremely well. They have two types. They're vinyl, but they're still made well. They have two different weights of vinyl for the sole and the sides. They also have a cardboard insert, and then they have like a fake sheep's wool liner. Now, it is possible, if you are like me and you have craft items all over the place, I have pieces of leather that I could actually, I wouldn't be able to add a vinyl sole necessarily. You can buy traction fabric that you could sew at the bottom. But just out of the leather I have, I can form the bottom here. I would use one piece of leather, pull it up around like a cardboard foot form, and then somehow stitch it in the back and get the same thing here. And then depending on how thick your leather is, you can just use a hole punch. You might have to get a leather punch depending. And put the holes in around and make your own soles for slipper socks. But to use this kind of a bat for either batting or the cushioning, now I'm thinking, I actually like extra thick socks because I don't really have foot problems, I have leg problems. So the more comfortable my feet are, the less things I have to think about. The pain I get is in my upper legs and above my knees. And so if my feet are comfortable, I tend to feel a little bit better anyway. But so in order to use a carded bat as a cushion or as a batting in a quilt or in a dog bed or something like that, what I'm going to be doing is stitching this. I have the 237 is on center needle position. I have the longest zigzag, and I have the longest stitch length. So what we're going to do, we're almost basting this. And this will pull apart if you pull it apart. So over time with wear, you don't want it to be pulling it apart. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and run a zigzag, a loose zigzag through this, and basically be basting it.